What's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, I'm going to be covering UTMs and URL tracking parameters. Now, as we've all had to endure with the iOS update, there's been some tracking hiccups over the last few months and even the last few years when it comes to being able to retain data specifically for iOS users, right? People who are using iPhones, iPads, Macs, etc. So with this update, users got a notification that asked if they wanted their data to be tracked by the specific ad platform, and most people said no, even though Facebook and Instagram tried to position it in a way where it made it seem as though the reason why they needed that data is so they can show that user more relevant ads, which is true, but that's how they positioned it. Didn't work out. So now here we are. So as an advertiser, what can you and I do in order to retain more of that data, or at least have it show up in some area, whether it's a third-party dashboard, on the Facebook Ads Manager, etc., so we can make better media buying decisions? Now, one of those solutions, again, is UTMs and URL parameters. So instead of me boring you with a PowerPoint, I'm just going to show you two great articles that explain UTMs and URL parameters in a very digestible way. So UTM tags are simply an addition to the destination URL of your ads, which allow you to track traffic from your Facebook and or Instagram campaigns and send it to Google Analytics for campaign performance tracking. Now, for starters, you can track from multiple social platforms, not just Facebook and Instagram. And secondly, you can track outside of just Google Analytics, right? That's just a general hub for tracking analytics. But if you're using Shopify, they have their own report section that allows you to get a pretty good and comprehensive breakdown of where your traffic is coming from. So now, what does a UTM look like, right? So before we talk about what a UTM looks like, it's important, again, to know what it does. So my interpretation of that, and from what I've seen in using them over the years, is that a UTM is basically a series of numbers, letters, and even icons that you attach at the end of a URL. And you can plug in key information that will reveal itself on a third-party dashboard and show to you where that purchase came from, even if the ad platform itself didn't pick up that purchase. So let's say Sally came through one of your UTMs and purchased one of your necklaces on Facebook. Facebook might not be able to interpret that data and show on the platform that Sally made that purchase through a specific campaign ad set and ad. But your URL parameter on your third-party, tracking and attribution dashboard, it might show you that it came through that specific UTM, and now you can make better decisions because you actually know where your purchases are coming from. So here's what that kind of looks like. So this is the original link of this specific article, and this is what it looks like with UTMs, right? There's a question mark at the end of the URL followed by the URL parameter, and this gives more information on where that specific user might have came from, right? So in this case, they came from a social platform. It was organic. They came through, more specifically LinkedIn, right? They came from a campaign that had this naming convention and content that was associated with UTMs and tags, right? So you can basically put whatever you want in here, but I think it'll be best explained if I actually explain the type forms, if I explain each of these fields and their functionality. So there's 5 main form fields: campaign source, campaign medium, term, content, and name. Now, we can use them in different ways, but what's most important about using these form fields is that you have a consistent and a congruent naming convention throughout all of your campaigns and all of your social platforms. So you want to be mindful of things like capitalization, because if you put CPC in all capital letters versus lowercase letters, it's going to change the way that that data is being shown on a third-party tracking dashboard. So you need to make sure that your naming conventions are congruent and you have all of these things really organized so it's not difficult to interpret your data at the end of the day. So campaign source is basically what platform or where the traffic actually came from. So this could be LinkedIn, this could be Facebook, this could be organic. Now, campaign medium is usually like the objective of the campaign. So if it's Google, you can put like CPC. If you're trying to go for cost per lead, you can put CPL. If it's cost per purchase, you can do CPP. But again, these are all for kind of internal reference. So you can really put whatever you want as long as you keep it congruent in your naming conventions. Now, for the campaign term, this is usually where you just want to put your campaign name, but you might not want to put just the campaign name. You might want to attach it with something like a date or a number, for example, 1.0 or 2.0, so that you can know which version of that campaign it actually is. So you might be launching a campaign called puppies testing because you're testing a bunch of interests that have puppies in them, and then you might duplicate that campaign and also have a campaign that's called puppies testing, and now you're not going to know which puppy testing campaign that specific purchase came from. So you might want to say puppies 2.0. That's where you would want to differentiate the campaign names. Then you have campaign content. I personally use the name of the ad set here when I'm using it statically, and when I'm using it dynamically, I just keep it blank. Now, what's the difference between static and dynamic URLs, you might ask? Well, a URL parameter that's static is something that you plug in all of these terms for, and you'll have to manually go into every single ad and make sure that that campaign name, all of the terms, everything is already pre-filled in so that it reports on that third-party platform. But then you have dynamic parameters, and that's where you just have a universal UTM tracking script in which automatically transfers data from those parameters to whatever the third-party reporting dashboard is, and it'll pull and extract that information automatically. So you can just have campaign.name, for example, in these little curly brackets, and it'll automatically pull the campaign name for you. Now, sometimes these aren't as effective because there has to be an extra level of legwork done by the platform in order to automatically pull these events. And so what I would recommend if you're just starting out with these is to try a little bit of both static and dynamic UTMs and URL parameters, and figure out which one best suits your needs. So again, with campaign name, term, and content, any of these you can basically just put the campaign name, ad set, and ad if you want to keep organized that way. If you want to just associate one URL per campaign, you can do that as well. And you can just have campaign and then pretty much ignore content and term if you really wanted to. Now, lastly, you can use a shortened URL if you're posting any of these links anywhere to where you don't want to have a ton of letters and numbers at the end of it because maybe you don't think it looks professional or trustworthy or whatever it might be. So you can actually take a URL parameter at the end of one of the longer form URLs you might have for your Shopify store, and you can actually convert it into something like a rebrandly link or a bit.ly link, and it will allow you to retain the same, URL tracking benefits, but in a shorter, more digestible link for your target audience. And here's an example of what that might look like in Google Analytics, right? So as you see, you have these sources, right? You have Google, you have direct, you have mail, you have YouTube, etc. And it's going to show you, the platform that it came from, as well as any of like the key terms or the content that's associated with that platform, right? So not only do you know that these purchases came from Google, but you know that it came from the organic side of things or the search side of things rather than from CPC or from paid ads. Now, if you're a Facebook advertiser like me, you have two options of how you can integrate these URLs. One of them is in the section called URL parameters, which is at the ad level on Facebook. The second way is by actually integrating it to the direct URL. So like we previously showed, if you go ahead and just attach that URL parameter at the end of your core product URL with a question mark, then it'll pretty much have the exact same impacts as if you put it in the URL parameters box on Facebook. Now, if you're using any third-party tracking solutions that have their own set of custom parameters, then you can combine two URL parameters with an and symbol. All right, so I know all of that might have been a little bit complicated if this is your first time hearing about UTMs. So number one, I would encourage that you guys continue to go and do research. But number two, I would encourage you guys to actually implement these into your business so you can actually learn through what I call experiential learning, which is doing it and then kind of figuring out as you go. And you're gonna have a good amount of information on the internet to use, and so you shouldn't screw things up too badly, but go ahead and try implementing your own forms of URL parameters and use things like Google Analytics or Shopify to be able to go into the reporting section so that you can make better decisions with your ads. So again, just to recap, what a URL parameter is just a series of letters and numbers and symbols that you attach at the end of your core URL that allows you to have a third-party dashboard reveal this data in a way that might be more accurate or better than the actual ad tracking platforms themselves. For example, Facebook and their Facebook pixel, or TikTok and their TikTok pixel. Where sales might be missed on the actual ad platform, they might be recovered through these UTMs on these third-party dashboards, and that's what makes it so powerful. So if you have any other questions regarding UTM-based tracking, make sure to leave them in the comments below. And other than that, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.